let's welcome in Murat Atesh of the program for our weekly visit. Lots going on, Murat. You can imagine how fired up people were around these parts when they heard that the Winnipeg Jets were interviewing Barry Trotz yesterday. Got in first. Now, it does sound like Barry's going to be doing his due diligence. There's a report out of Philadelphia that he'll have a meeting with the Philadelphia Flyers later on this week. Certainly the Vegas Golden Knights, I'd imagine, will look to reach out. They've got plenty of Manitoba connections. But what did you think yesterday when you saw Friedman's list? They said he was going to take 1 week off. Well, he took that week off, and first up was the Winnipeg Jets. You take anything from that, Murat?
I do think it's a good sign. It's definitely not a bad sign. We can say that much. Without knowing the inner logistics of how Barry's living his life. I mean, maybe he was just at home and Winnipeg was the first location for him on his way onto the road to go on the big tour that will be all the interviews that he has. It could be as simple as that. It could be as exciting as Winnipeg is one of the legitimate front runners for his services. I don't think Barry Trotz is in a position to be wasting his time right now either. So I think it's meaningful that that interview happened. I imagine he'd have as many questions for the Winnipeg Jets as the Jets had for him. And man, oh man, you know, I'm getting excited. I'm supposed to be objective in all of this, right? But I just hold Barry Trotz as such a high-level coach that the idea that they did get as far as an interview, you know, it has me excited to see what changes he could make in Winnipeg if it gets that far.
Well, and you've got a great piece in The Athletic, and we'll sort of go through it, and we'll talk about what could happen on the ice and why the Jets might be attractive to a free agent head coach. But there's the other side of things when it comes to the public pulse of the fan base. Some eroded confidence that you certainly saw when it came to the fan poll at the end of the season. And that goes with, the disappointing season that the Winnipeg Jets had. We've been sort of banging this drum all week, or really since last week, but there's nobody that could stem that or almost turn it around in a 180 in a matter of hours than a press conference announcing Barry Trotz as the coach of the Winnipeg Jets as far as what's happening off the ice with the business operation of True North.
Yeah, and it's not that he fixes every problem simply by having his name announced, but when it comes to a sense of maybe goodwill or a sense of, how about this, a sense of Winnipeg doing everything it can to be as elite as it possibly can as an organization. And I think that's the level of coach that Barry Trotz is. And that's, I listened to a podcast at the coach's site by Barry Trotz's agent, Gil Scott. And Gil was talking about how coaches prepare for head coaching interviews like the one that Trotz had with Winnipeg yesterday. And in addition to all the things like do your homework, know the organization inside and out, as I'm sure Barry has done in preparation for meeting with the Jets. Another key point that he advises his clients, including Barry Trotz, including Bruce Boudreau and others, is help your owner win the press conference. The day that they announce that hiring, that ownership group, that general manager, everybody involved wants to be able to, look to the fans, look to the response they get, and have this sensation that they did the very best thing and that it will be celebrated. I think, like you said, Huss, I think Trotz is one of a few guys that genuinely check off every bucket. And then, of course, he has to go to work. He has to get to, turning the deep dive he would have done by way of homework into action, setting in whatever plans that he and the and management agree upon into, a structured step-by-step plan. And we know there's lots of frustration in Winnipeg based on the year that just happened. But I think that you're exactly right. There isn't a name on the market that could be a bigger splash than Manitoba's very own Barry Trotz.
Yeah, and for a lot of reasons, I think it would reinstill some lost confidence in a part of the fan base that, unfortunately for True North, I think grew substantially over the course of that season. But back to the conversation with Gil Scott, because I found that as a really interesting part of your article at The Athletic, that it's out on this topic. Part of it was doing the homework on the club that you're interviewing on. And I don't know if there could be anything more fascinating than hearing what Barry Trotz had to say as a prospective coach for the Winnipeg Jets to the guys running the Winnipeg Jets about the club that he potentially could take over next season.
Yeah, I would love to be on a fly on the wall for that. Oh my goodness. And, some interviews are short, and this is again from that podcast at the coach's site that Gil speaks heavily in. Some are short. It's like the team has already circled you as their number one guy. They're not going to ask too many questions beyond vision and things like that. Could be as short as a dinner. And other interviews that his clients have gone through have been hours and hours. They're late at dinner. They're using salt and pepper shakers as strategy pieces or as X's and O's on the rink, and they're really getting into it. So it could have been any degree of flavor of that. But given the state that Winnipeg was in and the reasons why they need a new head coach, and the uncertainty around star players coming in out of the exit interviews, all of that sort of stuff, I think it's a little bit more unique than a 30-minute, oh, hey, you're good, I'm good, great. I think there was a deep dive. I would expect that there was some real frank discussion, and I would hope that there was some real frank discussion because the more honest that Trotz would be, the more open about their needs Winnipeg would be. I think that would be not only better indication that it's a serious possibility, but it's also the sort of groundwork that you would require for there actually to be progress made. If you can't name the issue, you can't solve the issue. And given how much we respect Trotz as a coaching voice in the National Hockey League, knowing exactly what he thought from the safety of having so many suitors pitching him for work right now, man, I would love to know.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'd also like to be Gil Scott right now because I'm sure that pays quite well considering what's going to be thrown at Barry Trotz with wherever he finishes up. The other interesting question about Barry Trotz, or maybe not question, but report, is that he's got his sights set on management after coaching. And I'm interested in your thoughts. Cheveldayoff's got a 3-year deal. He's moving forward as the general manager. We know the relationship between the GM and the owner and the Larry Simmons and Zinger. These guys have been together for a long time. How beneficial do you think the arrival of Barry Trotz could be, not necessarily to the coaching part, but to the actual management of the club, player personnel, and how impactful might he be in this offseason we've been talking about for months that could potentially have some franchise-changing moves coming up in the next little while?
Yeah, that's such an interesting one because it's tough to know in this case. And there's lots of things that I kind of want to think about on that topic. When it comes to coaching, he has an incredible resume demonstrated year over year over year. This one would have been disappointing on Long Island, but everything before that outperformed expectations in Long Island, won a cup in Washington, was the longest coach in Nashville Predators history. Everything is there. But when it comes to GM, when it comes to player personnel, if he's had input on the clubs that he's worked at so far, we don't necessarily have that clearly laid out for us. Which decisions did he contribute to? Which didn't he? How did they work out? All of that sort of stuff. So as much as we respect the hockey mind, the track record probably goes back to Dauphin Kings in the 1980s when he was GM of that organization as well as leading it. So there's a sense, and I think there's a confidence when you know that somebody is that plugged in, that intelligent, all of those things, that they're going to do a good job. But there's also a lot of learning that would need to take place. And if that is his interest and Winnipeg's able to help him step into it a little bit over, let's say, these next 3 years, I think that's a good fit because Cheveldayoff is established. He knows the ins and outs. You have Larry Simmons, who's the capologist, who's done so much good work with the LTIR business, all the different stuff. I think that management is more or less settled in terms of knowing, I guess, the X's and O's of its positions and could be in a great position to teach as well as to accommodate a new voice, especially if, one of the things that we hear a lot is that Mark Chipman has been a relatively hands-on owner. I've heard that from people very close to the team. And if there's a sense that he'd like to pull back and let the hockey people hockey, so to speak, well, then maybe if you're able to train a Barry Trotz over that time and have that sort of success, stepwise him up, maybe Kevin Cheveldayoff becomes president of hockey operations someday. Maybe you build out the staff that's responsible for hockey operations and flesh it out. Because in a salary cap universe, if you're trying to win, everybody's player payroll is set within a particular range, but management, scouts, analytics, all of that other sort of stuff, that's where you see teams, the real heavy hitters, the real wealthy clubs that like to spend. That's where they can sort of differentiate themselves. And a president of hockey ops could be a nice step down the line.
You've got a section in the piece called A Path to the Front Office, and I think that has to be a big part of the conversation with Trotz. Because of what you said, do you think the Jets have an advantage in that specific category as opposed to a place like Vegas where you've got Kelly McCrimmon and Georgia McPhee already there, and in Philadelphia, a place that's just had a turnover in their management recently?
You know what? Yeah, it's a situation where, a lot of things are a double-edged sword, right? The same exact aspect of your organization that can be a tremendous strength in one context can be a weakness in another. And as one example, and I promise I'll get to your question, but one example that got carved apart in the fan survey was the loyalty that True North shows, right? The amount of years Paul Maurice was around, the contracts that veterans get, and the sense that there's this real commitment to people above results. But if you're a head coach looking for some security or looking to grow in an organization, and you're comparing Winnipeg's place right now, the loyalty it has shown to the Paul Maurice's, Kevin Shovel-Dayoffs, Blake Wheelers and others of the world over the years, and the way that it's been able to establish that as a fundamental tenet, and you compare that to Vegas, who's been through Gerard Gallant, who's been through Pete DeBoer, who seems to, jettison players at a moment's notice as well. I mean, isn't Winnipeg's loyalty more appealing to you in that sort of capacity? For me, the same thing applies to Winnipeg's current front office structure. And there are so many organizations that spend more on the front office, on scouting staffs, both amateur and professional, on analytics staffs, and really flesh those sorts of things out. All of the consultants, everything, president of hockey operations being another one. So, that does strike me as a weakness, perhaps in Winnipeg's case, but they're also small and conceivably able to adapt. So if there is an organization that is positioned to create this type of position, or to go from where it's standing right now to integrating somebody like Barry Trotz in that capacity, I think it's Winnipeg just because of the same reasons that I listed as a weakness. And I think that that's unique to Winnipeg.
Murat of The Athletic is with us. We're discussing his latest piece in The Athletic. It is entitled Why Barry Trotz Should Pick the Winnipeg Jets for His Next Coaching Job. I love the title. I'm 100% behind it. Let's talk about the actual team. If you're Barry Trotz, what is attractive about the Winnipeg Jets, the actual hockey, the head coaching job, as opposed to the other ones? And how do you think it compares to Vegas, to Philadelphia, to a team like Detroit, which is in a very different stage of a rebuild as opposed to where Winnipeg, Vegas is? And I'm not even sure where Philly is right now after the dumpster fire of a season that they just finished out and all the turmoil they've had in the organization over the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key question, because Barry Trotz has suitors. Barry Trotz gets to interview clubs and see what the vision is and see how he fits into it as a potential solution. And one thing that we often overlook is that these people are people. They're human beings with pre-existing relationships, with pre-existing resumes, with careers built up. Barry Trotz has won a Stanley Cup. He's done that in Washington with a fairly stacked team and a superstar like Alex Ovechkin sort of buying into his system as the years went on. He's taken a middle-of-the-road New York Islanders team beyond expectations based on the structure that he was able to implement there as well. And there's a lot of reasons to believe that coaching was a major part of that. So what do you want if you're Barry Trotz? And from afar, my opinion is that Winnipeg, if you're looking to have that Calgary Flames style turnaround, where you believe the pieces are in place for actual success, and you want to feel like a coach can be the difference maker, look no further than the Winnipeg Jets. Because as it stands today, without any major roster moves or blockbusters, which could yet happen, Mark Scheifele, Pierre-Luc Dubois down the middle, that's foundation for potential success if you can get everybody pulling on the same rope. Kyle Connor just hit 93 points, has defensive room to grow. Clearly, there's a lot of veteran defensemen as well. Brendan Dillon, Nate Schmidt, who have succeeded in top four capacities in previous environments, weren't able to do that in Winnipeg. But the talent is there. There's at least an above average team on paper in the Winnipeg Jets room right now. And I think that if you're a coach looking to feel an impact that you can take good or okay or middle of the road, but exploit the biggest strengths and teach around the weaknesses, I think Winnipeg has tremendous room for growth under a coaching transformation. And I think that based on what you heard from some of the most important players, I mean, Andrew Kopp before he was traded, but then Kyle Connor, Nikolai Ehlers, Paul Stastny, et cetera. Kyle Connor, let's use him as an example. this team wants to be held accountable. This team wants to have high standards and high levels of accountability that are tied directly to its performance, because there are really prime-aged, talented core pieces that want to get the most out of themselves during this window of their career. And I don't think you have to look at a Detroit that's rebuilding and certainly has some impressive young players, but has more work to do on paper. I don't know if Vegas is appealing, because certainly there's a tremendous amount of talent there. And Jack Eichel having a proper offseason after that back surgery, getting back into things, that's going to be a good team. I don't think there's a way around that. But Winnipeg's a place where a coach can have a tremendous impact, can compete for the playoffs. And if the right moves are made, well, then you sort of get into that everybody has a chance. But then you tell that to a team going up against the Colorado Avalanche, and we'll see.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. One of the other pieces you talk about is the defensive issues that the Winnipeg Jets have had. Now, listen, there were more than just defense. I mean, we were often puzzled as to why the Jets had such a hard time scoring goals at times last season with all the offensive talent they had. But really, I think the foundation of where things fell apart was defensively. Barry Trotz, that is his calling card. And we know what he's done in the past. But I think about the Islanders team, the buy-in that he got from those top players, but also the guys that he ran, like sometimes, I mean, close to what he did the top players, third liners, fourth liners, Clutterbuck and the like. Barry Trotz took this job. How different of a roster do you think we see on opening night next year for the Winnipeg Jets?
Well, I mean, that's a wonderful question. And I think, I mean, you just look at past performance. You look at the past examples, like you say, you know, Matt Martin, Cal Clutterbuck, that sort of energy line that was trustable as well, and that, you know, averaged 12 minutes a night. Could you imagine a Winnipeg Jets fourth line playing 12 minutes a night?
That's 3 times as much as they usually played this year.
Right? I mean, I don't know if the Jets have, you know, a Cal Clutterbuck on the roster right now. But if you're, I want to say, Mason Appleton, that's probably a little higher up the depth chart. You probably already have your opportunity. If you're Jansen Harkins, perhaps you're thinking to yourself, maybe there's a new coach that I can impress. Evgeny Svechnikov, I don't know that fits the fourth line type that Barry Trotz has used in the past. So the question for me then becomes, did he get the most out of those guys because they were the pieces he had and he found a way to exploit them? Or is that the template by which he wants to work? And I haven't done the homework to know the exact timelines to sort of suggest that at this point. But if that is the template, then you're going to look for, I mean, Brendan Lemieux types when he was a Winnipeg Jet. I think he's a bit of a wild card, a Brendan Lemieux type because of the penalty minutes and other sorts of things. But he did have that edge. And I wonder if that's a direction that Winnipeg would look to augment itself, if that's the direction Trotz goes. Or we just see a way in which the coach seeks to get more out of that bottom six by maybe empowering it a little bit more. You know, and I think about a few years ago when we had that third line of Jack Roslovic, Jansen Harkins, and I think it was Mason Appleton, the class of 2015 line for a little while. It had tremendous success and then was broken apart and people were sent back to lower minutes. It seems as though even if the narrative is always the veteran coach plays the veteran players, and you can hear some of that coming out of Long Island as well, when you look at the minutes, they're more spread out, and it seems like there's an opportunity for guys in those bottom slots. And there are a lot of guys like Harkins, Svechnikov, who saw their minutes go up and down, that you can't really tell if they're in Winnipeg's long-term plans or not. And so there's a little bit of room for tweaking if they want there to be tweaking.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I'll say, and this goes back to that fourth line that he leaned on prolifically, consistently, pretty much for his entire time in New York, that, I mean, the one guy that stands out to me that would be a perfect fit, that could be maybe even an upgrade from some of those guys today, is Adam Lowry. But Adam Lowry's played in a different spot right now. But I mean, if you're talking about 12 to 13 minutes and potentially penalty killing time or something like that, then the whole nomination of who's the fourth line, who's the third line almost goes out the window. But that happens on a well-balanced hockey team. And that's been a real Achilles heel from my perspective of the Jets, particularly last season, is that they were so top heavy that when things weren't going well for the top guys, or at times when there was consistently lackadaisical play on the most important aspects of play in your own end, it's very difficult to win hockey games. And then you start creating some problems within the room as well about who's playing, why are they playing so much, and you have some guys that sort of feel left out as being real bit parts of a team, like we saw. I think many of the fourth liners are the guys near the bottom of the lineup, the situation that they were in under both Paul Maurice and Dave Lowry over the course of the last season.
Yeah, I wouldn't begrudge anybody further down the Winnipeg Jets lineup for feeling as if there were a different set of standards in play, depending on who you were on that team. And I think that that's something that you look to change. And I don't mean that in any insidious way, though, we hear things from time to time. I just mean that if you look at the minutes, and the justification for some minutes getting taken away from bottom players and minutes that don't get taken away from top players, you have Mark Scheifele playing Connor McDavid minutes without Connor McDavid results. That's going to, ruffle a feather or two, I would think. So I like the Adam Lowry point, and almost no matter what happens in the future, you have to think that Adam Lowry's primed. I don't want to say for a Josh Morrissey style turnaround, because that's big. That's a big swing. But Adam Lowry has to be exhaling right now, right? Without his dad as coach, the optics that come with that, without that kind of stress over minutes. His performance has been up and down in the last few seasons, where there are times where he looks every bit that bottom six driver who can lean on people, play physically, and he's a unique player type on the Winnipeg Jets. And there are times where he just hasn't been able to get it done, and the offense doesn't track with the minutes that he gets either. If you can build a line around him that looks at that 12-minute mark or what have you, I do think that there's room for growth for the team. Just balance in general. I don't think it's right that Winnipeg's top players play the McDavid-Draisaitl minutes, because they're not getting the McDavid-Draisaitl type results. And that type of balance is going to be interesting to see what happens no matter who's coach next year.
Well, you know what? I don't have the numbers in front of me, and I'll put you on the spot. Feel free to pass on this, but my observation of Adam Lowry's season was the first half was a bit of a struggle, and part of it was that they tried all sorts of different guys in that spot along with him. The year before, he was basically stapled with Mason Appleton. There was some consistency. They never really did see that. And a lot of it started with Christian Vesalainen getting, it's so funny. We talk about young players being held back. Christian Vesalainen had this glorious opportunity, and frankly, from my perspective, didn't make much of it. I thought that the Adam Lowry we saw coming out of the All-Star break for the final 2.5 months of the season was an Adam Lowry playing near the top of his game, much like we'd seen in previous seasons. Did you share that observation on sort of Adam Lowry's body of work for last year?
100%. It follows, in my mind, exactly the arc that you laid out. And the reason I see it that way is twofold. First, let me tangent and say that Christian Vesalainen business was strange. It was strange and it was misguided. And if you go back to last summer, everything we were writing, all of the discussion around the team, there was clearly a job opening on third line right wing if Winnipeg was going to go cop Lowry X. And that Christian Vesalainen's resume suggested he could be that guy. I don't know that we saw that coming. And yet, there were whispers that he was going to be that guy throughout the offseason. You saw it from day one at camp. You saw it continue. You saw it continue through a lot of not very much in the way of results as well. And I don't know if that's body type. I believe Paul Maurice suggested that it wasn't going to be as purely play against the elites, but maybe play against size. So they were looking for a bigger player in that sort of role. And okay, I can hear a little bit of that argument, but they certainly went to it for a long time without a tremendous amount of success. Maybe I'm saying this, nobody's told me this. Maybe there's a sense that we want our first round pick to look to get a proper shot so that we can see why we've invested in him for so long or what have you, or to try to boost value there, get a return from, a pick that they invested a lot in. I'm not sure, but it was misguided. It was a mistake. I don't mind the experiment, but then the commitment to it. That was a strange play on behalf of the Winnipeg Jets. Moving on, though, then you get a lesson of what most of these guys do. quality of line mate matters more than almost any other thing that you can get into. And that's why you have bit players score alongside superstars, as long as you know who your drivers are. That's why you can have Svechnikov lighted up with Connor and Dubois, or Parkins or Perfetti lighted up in that line. Whoever's going to get that job is going to do well. Well, Adam Lowry isn't such an amazing, dominant third line center that he's going to carry a rookie who's not, or a young player who's not necessarily custom built for that role. Give him line mates, and you get to see his strengths come out. And that's why you're looking for more balance and maybe some better decisions about who difference makers actually are, no matter how big they are or where they were drafted.
You mentioned Vesalainen as a first rounder, and granted, the situation from forwards to defense was very different last season. You had the new veterans come in, the $10 million added to the salary cap with Dillon and Schmidt. I mean, there wasn't the same path to playing. But man, what a difference in the way Christian Vesalainen was handled, the opportunity he was given, as opposed to a Ville Heinola, for all those reasons that I mentioned. But I want to ask you about Heinola in particular, because, of course, it was a disappointing end of the season for the Moose, losing in Game 5. I thought Ville really bounced back from, certainly the play getting pickpocketed in Game 3. He was, a dominant force in the remainder of that game and in Game 4. Mark Morrison talked ravingly about, what he had shown and what he had proved. Ville yesterday at the final media availabilities for the club talked so glowingly about being part of the team and how much he enjoyed being on the Manitoba Moose. And the one quote that sort of stood out was, I was allowed to be myself here. Did that, is it normally when someone says like that, I think you can sort of brush it off, but considering everything else we've heard about the big club, the locker room, did that resonate with you at all a little bit as to something that, man, the Winnipeg Jets, not the Moose, really need to get right for young players?
Well, the alarm bell went off.
Yeah, Liney said the same thing about going to Columbus, by the way.
Okay, so I mean, there's a pattern. The alarm bell goes off. 100% it does. I have to add the caveat. I wasn't in the room, so I don't necessarily know the body language or the context or those sorts of things.
Fair.
Caveat number 2, English is his second language, et cetera. It's all these caveats get it. It's everything before the word "but" you can sometimes throw out, right? But those are important caveats. That said, yeah, that sends alarm bells off. And when Ville Heinola has been part of Winnipeg Jets practices in the past, I look for that. I don't want to say body language. That's not exactly it. But you can tell when who's joking with who's hanging out with who. You can tell the pecking order of these guys if they didn't have numbers on their jerseys or names or anything like that, just by how they interact with each other. And in the past, my observation was that Ville Heinola looked and seemed to feel as though he didn't necessarily belong amongst the veterans or the top 6 guys in that group. It might be the normal, natural, younger, rookie type player. I'm sure every young player goes through a certain amount of transition phase before feeling like they belong on the big club. I think that's an important thing to acknowledge. But towards the end of this season, I started seeing these really great examples of Brendan Dillon joking around with him on the ice. That press conference he had with Nate Schmidt, where Nate Schmidt was answering questions from reporters about what it was like for him to be a young player. And you could tell every word was directed not just at the reporters, but at Heinola beside him. And you got to see these really great examples of what integrating the new guy, what making him feel comfortable actually looks like. And I can remember tweeting from practice, hey, Paul Stastny and Ville Heinola are practicing right now. Schmidt and Dillon are kind of teasing and they're jumping in and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, this is the first time where I've really felt as though there's been this really concerted effort to integrate the guy, at least socially, on the ice in the middle of a practice, which is just one niche that we get to observe. And I thought that was good from those guys. Is it missing from other places? I'd believe it. I would absolutely believe that, because I believe that quote probably does mean something from Ville Heinola. And I think that Winnipeg's defense group did a good job of it this year, but maybe you don't get that same sort of support from top to bottom of that dressing room.
Well, and I think it speaks to the culture improvements that need to happen. And it got me thinking, and I've spoken about this for the last couple of years occasionally when we've been speaking about the Jets, but some things that Zdeno Chara said a few years ago continue to ring in my ears when we talk about the Jets and the ease of welcoming in young players and what they have to do to sort of to last as Winnipeg Jets. And there was an article in The Athletic by Joe McDonald in November of 2019. And they were talking about a newcomer, a guy, Cameron Hughes, was making his NHL debut. And he didn't skate a lap or two on his own at the start of the pregame warm-up, something that's somewhat of a rookie ritual. And I mean, this is not hazing. This is, I think, a lot of guys are sort of excited, and it's a little bit of a funny thing. But Chara, I'm just going to read a couple of these quotes from this piece. He goes, "I've been through some stuff and had to do certain things a young player, and I didn't like it. Right then, I made up my mind that if I was ever in control of that sort of environment and could make a change, I would do it." He always respectfully describes newcomers as first-year players. This was another one. "I don't use the word rookie because it just doesn't sound right. Little things go a long way and make a big difference from these young men who are trying to stay and establish themselves in a league. If we can help them out in any way, that's great." And then this is really, how can you expect something out of a young player on the ice when you treat him differently off the ice? "I believe in certainly acts or behaviors, and it's a standard for me, and we're not going to be using anything against anyone." And listen, I'm not pointing fingers or throwing a scud at Blake Wheeler or anything like that, but it just seems like that is so different than what has been the culture of the Winnipeg Jets. And maybe this goes to Barry Trotz, maybe that goes to the new head coach, maybe that goes to a new attitude as far as the way they welcome in players in. But I think we've seen that some younger players have had a real tough time feeling a part of the team and what they have to do to sort of get to that point. And it seems in stark contrast to an environment like a very successful team like the Boston Bruins that do it over and over again with new faces each and every year coming in the lineup and sort of emerging to the outside of people out of nowhere. And I think that even though it's a few years old, gives a pretty good window into how maybe some teams are handling things in a different way as opposed to the old school way of, you're a rookie until we tell you and you're going to be doing this stuff. And I found that so interesting, and I always think about it when we're talking about some of the issues that we've heard that the Winnipeg Jets have had behind closed doors.
That is an incredible quote. That is an incredible series of quotes. I mean, I think you have to admire anybody in any context who embodies the be the change mentality, right? Because it is so easy to absorb that difficult stuff that Chara talks about, whatever it was, and then want to pass it on to the next generation, right? Like, the old, it happened to me, it'll happen to the next generation sort of stuff. And to hear him say that he's going to draw that line in the sand and make that transformation is powerful, especially because one of the counter arguments that I would I don't hold, but comes into my mind when I hear that warm, integrated stuff is, well, maybe in the 90s or early 2000s when, the Blake Wheelers, Joe Thorntons, and that generation of players came into the league, maybe that stuff was normal. And so maybe it's normal for them to pass it on to new generations, a certain, I would call it, power distance between the top and the bottom of that pecking order that was just normal and expected and all that sort of stuff. But you gave that quote to me from Zdeno Chara, who is then, I believe, if I saw the screen, 42 years old. So this is not just an old school, new school thing. Oh, the modern millennial player needs to be coddled or whatever else it is. One of the oldest players in the National Hockey League, if not the oldest, my stats are, is willing to make that transition and that cultural change. That's, like, Huss, I don't know what to say other than that's powerful. And the degree to which you get the best out of people is when you make them feel the most comfortable. And, I have heard similar things about young players in Winnipeg not always feeling the most welcome, or there being a power distance, whatever name we want to put to that. Or you have Paul Maurice or Blake Wheeler, whoever it is, talk about the youth holding the team back. And if you're a 23-year-old player listening to that, like, how welcome can you feel? And that's only what gets said publicly. So all I can say is you've given me a lot to think about with that. And I wish I'd read it in 2019.
Yeah, well, and just the Hughes was this young player that was sort of the focus that had just made his debut. And I'll just finish this one quote, and this I think is exactly what you want your new players to be feeling. Um, he said, "Yeah, it's pretty awesome," said Hughes, who had to explain to his dad that the Bruins do not participate in any of those ridiculous practices. They make you feel comfortable, and that's how it should be. And again, if you're an Athletic subscriber, it is from November 4th, 2019. Joe McDonald wrote the piece on the Boston Bruins. They had just been to the Stanley Cup final. And just to your point of it, I mean, and I'm not talking about, this is not about hazing or anything like that, although that it's been brought up. But you do have guys that go through a bunch of bullshit to kind of finally establish themselves, and maybe they hold them against. And much like in so many other ways, it sort of manifests itself into doing that again later on in your career. And listen, I just think at this point, with everything that we've talked about and learned about what's happened with the Winnipeg Jets and some of the problems that they've had, thinking about that sort of an environment and how they can build that would go a long ways to creating a new culture, one that welcomes everyone in, and frankly, I think gets the most out of every player on the team. Murat, this has been awesome. Folks, get to The Athletic. You can read the piece about Barry Trotz, and we'll cross our fingers that you'll have many more columns about Mr. Trotz in the future, depending on what happens over the next little while.
Yeah, I appreciate everything. Great chat.